Hello and welcome to Lesson 6. Before we start this lesson, what I'd like to do is to continue our exploration of how polymer processing operations make materials that are used every day worldwide. So, today, let's think about keeping food from spoiling prematurely. Rightly or wrongly, fresh foods are transported globally on a near just-in-time manner every day, and it is imperative to prevent wastage. One of the tools available to suppliers to do this are packaging materials with multiple functional layers. So, let's take a look at an example of how these multi-layer films are constructed and what they achieve. So, these multi-layer films, a picture of which I've put on the board, are probably all too familiar to you. They're the sorts of things that you might see on tearaway lids, on ready meals, or other food packaging. From a recycling standpoint, these present a problem. From an environmental standpoint, these probably do present a real problem. But from a keeping food fresh standpoint, they actually add real value. And so we have one of these tricky problems where, on one hand, it prevents a lot of wastage and allows a lot of people to get food of a quality they otherwise wouldn't have. But on the other hand, produces a real environmental burden. So in talking about these multi-layer films, the thing we need to keep in mind is how we can achieve future functionality that is similar, but with materials that are more environmentally benign, preferably totally environmentally benign. But let's have a look at what the state of the art today is to see what is achieved and how it is done so. So if we think of these multi-layer films, typically you're looking at different polymers to provide different functional properties. So a typical tear-off lid, for example, might consist firstly of a polyethylene outer, and that is there to give some mechanical strength, and if plasma treated, that gives you the possibility of inkjet printing on it, so you don't have to put additional labelling. Then underneath that, we might have an adhesion layer, such that the polyethylene can actually bond to the next functional layer beneath it. And that adhesion layer might consist of something like a polyurethane. Next, you might then have one of the functional components of the packaging. And for example, it might be an ethylene vinyl alcohol oxygen barrier. And that will prevent the diffusion of oxygen from the external environment into the food to prevent premature spoiling. You might also have moisture barriers at this point as well. Then you need another adhesion layer to ensure that that oxygen barrier can stick to the next bit of the construction. And the next bit of the construction might, for example, be a polyamide to give some abrasion resistance. Finally, what we need is something that can bond to the rest of the packaging. And so in this case, it might be another polyethylene layer, and this will give strength, as the outer did, but also give the ability to heat seal. And so polyethylene will be able to heat seal at, say, 170 to 180 degrees C onto what is probably a polypropylene container. And so in that one film, actually, you've got a heck of a lot of technology. You've got 6 different layers in maybe 100 microns of thickness, and each of those layers contributes a different function to the actual construction of the film. So the question then becomes, how does one make these? So let's simplify the problem a little bit, and let's move away from 6 different types of layer to something that's a little simpler, maybe a 2-layer film. Even if we look at a 2-layer film, we can start to see that there's a lot of technology involved, and we can abstract a 2-layer film to a many thousand layer film, depending on the design of the extrusion die. So let's have a look at this 2-layer film to start with, and if we've got 2 layers, we need 2 materials. So that infers 2 extruders. So we've got a co-extrusion problem now. We've got one material being extruded alongside another, and so that infers a lot about how one controls these 2 material flows to ensure that you've got an even flow through the die. It also entails a lot of rheology because, as we've known from EPD650, we've got all sorts of interesting flow behaviour that can happen if we've got polymers with non-zero first and second normal stress differences flowing in non-circular geometries. If you've forgotten about that, go and have a revisit at EPD640. So let's say we've got these 2 materials, material A, material B, being extruded, and they come together in a multi-layer film die. And we'll look in a little more detail at the construction of one of these dies in a second, because this is where the real magic happens. Out of the die will come a film, and downstream of the die you've got a typical cast film process. So you'll start with a chilled roller to make sure that the material is solidified, and then you'll have various stretching rollers to ensure that you've got the right type of orientation, and then you'll have hauling off and spooling to ensure that the product can actually be collected. So let's zoom in a little bit on what the film coming out of the die might look like. So there on the board is a scanning electron micrograph of an 8-layer film. The scale bar there is 50 microns, so this entire film thickness is of order 200-250 microns, and we can see layers in that film. There are actually 8 distinct layers, and we can see material A, material B, material A, material B, and so on and so forth, alternating. Now, we can do more than that, because depending how we design our film die and how many dies we stack together in series, we can actually get many thousands of layers. So there's another scanning electron micrograph there on the board of a film that's ostensibly 100 to 150 microns thick, containing 2048 layers. And if one looks very carefully, you can see the alternating A, B, A, B, A, B material that's present there. So the question then becomes, how does one design a film die to achieve this? And one of the best ways to answer this is to look in the patent literature. So here on the whiteboard is a patent that was filed back in 1992 for a multi-layer extrusion die. And let me talk you through what goes on here. So first of all, the flow direction is in the Z direction. And so material is flowing axially along this kind of die. Preceding this die, we're assuming that we've already managed to manufacture a co-extrusion of a layer of A on a layer of B. And so you'd have a film die designed to do that co-extrusion and to produce, let's say, an even layer of A and an even layer of B. And so coming into this die at the front end, which I've highlighted there, you've already got a 2-layer film. So if we look at the front end of this film splitting die, what we can see is this die, in effect, chops the film laterally into 4. And we can see then that there is a tortuous route through the die where each of these 4 split layers are recombined and stacked vertically. And so what we then get are our individual split films, our A-B layers, sandwiching on top of one another. If we look very carefully at the exit of this die, we can see it's what we call a convergent-divergent die. In one direction, it's diverging, in this case the X direction, because we're going from quite narrow bits of stacked film to quite a wide eventual film. But we're also ensuring that in the Y direction, the die converges. And so all the time, we're actually squeezing the material to try and ensure that we get a stable extradate. So what we have there is a means of converting a 2-layer film into an 8-layer film. And so if we think about it, you only need 5 of these units in series to go from a 2-layer film to a 2048-layer film, which is quite remarkable, frankly. So, if you want to see a film extrusion die in operation, I've put a link there on the whiteboard for you. I'll also put that link in the description, and so you can actually see the sorts of machinery that's involved in this kind of operation.